a discussion about President Joe Biden's nominee for Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. All that and more today, May 30th, 2023. Good morning, Early Birds. I'm Zimone Perez, and this is the Early Bird Brief, produced by Defense News and Military Times. Today, Defense News air warfare reporter Stephen Losey sits down with me to discuss President Joe Biden's nomination of Air Force Chief of Staff General C.Q. Brown to lead the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Stephen, thank you for joining us. A new chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was just announced. Who is the pick?
That's right. It's General C.Q. Brown. For the last 3 years, he's been the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and he's someone who's got a wealth of experience all around the world. He's an F-16 pilot, a very experienced fighter pilot. Before he was the Chief of Staff, he was the commander of Pacific Air Forces. He was in charge of the air campaign against the Islamic State in the Middle East, and he's had leadership roles in Europe, commanding wings of F-16s. And for the last 3 years, General Brown has been focused on trying to overhaul how the Air Force is structured, how its aircraft fleet looks, to try to get it ready for a potential conflict against a peer adversary such as China. He calls this effort Accelerate, Change, or Lose, and says that the military, and the Air Force in particular, has to transform right away, or it's not going to be able to counter an adversary such as China.
And so the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is kind of a different role. He's the highest-ranking uniformed officer, but he serves in a strategic capacity. So what kind of is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff?
That's right. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is the main military advisor to the President of the United States. Right now, it's Army General Mark Milley. If General Brown is confirmed as chairman, he's going to be meeting with President Biden on a regular basis, as well as meeting with military service secretaries and chiefs of staff of the various branches of the military. His job is to talk to all the representatives of the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, Space Force, get their insights into all the pressing issues that are facing the military in this day and age, kind of distill that input into a range of options that he then will present to President Biden and say, these are your choices, this is what I think is best, and this is my advice, Mr. President, is basically how the chairman of the Joint Chiefs operates.
Like you said, General Brown has a wealth of experience. He's served across the globe in a number of combatant commands, executing and planning strategy for the U.S. military forces abroad. What are those who have served with him and seen him rise up the ranks? What are they saying about his nomination to be the new highest-ranking uniformed leader of the military?
C.Q. Brown is well known as a very strategic thinker, someone who's put a lot of thought into what the Air Force needs and how it needs to transform. He describes himself as an introvert. He's kind of a quiet guy. Pretty uniformly, everyone I've spoken to talks about him in meetings as being the guy who is quiet at first and listens to other people's thoughts and insights and inputs, and then waits to speak. But when he speaks, everyone tells me that's when everybody else leans forward and listens, because they know what he says is going to have some key insight or idea. He's the guy who sits and listens, and when he decides it's time to speak, he's got something to say, and he's probably cracked the problem.
So, Stephen, you talk about this man that where in the room where decisions are being made, that when he speaks, people listen because, according to your sources, he's thoughtful, he ponders, he really contemplates his actions and his decisions and strategies on the battlefield and with regard to the broader force. But he also really thought a lot about a decision in the summer of 2020, a really tumultuous time for the country. Could you kind of describe that decision and the risk that he ran doing it?
In June 2020, right before General Brown had his vote in the Senate to confirm him as Chief of Staff of the Air Force, he made a video addressing the murder of George Floyd, which had happened in late May 2020. As a black gentleman, General Brown felt that very acutely, particularly his one of his two adult sons, expressed to his father, some of the turmoil that he was feeling. General Brown felt that he had a responsibility to say something to the airmen who he was about to command all across the Air Force to address the issue. And so the first week of June, he made and posted a video in which he spoke in very frank and very heartfelt terms about what he was feeling, some of the racism and, in some cases, microaggressions and things that he had experienced over his long career as a black person in the military.
I'm thinking about my Air Force career, where I was often the only African American in my squadron, or as a senior officer, the only African American in the room. I'm thinking about wearing the same flight suit with the same wings on my chest as my peers, and they being questioned by another military member, "Are you a pilot?" I'm thinking about how I sometimes felt my comments were perceived to represent the African American perspective, when it's just my perspective informed by being African American.
He also made it a challenge to himself. He said something along the lines of, "I can't fix racism, but I can do what I can to make life better for the airmen who are under my care." I'm kind of paraphrasing, but that's the gist of it. And that was a bit of a risk. I mean, it was a very tumultuous period in the country, obviously, and he was less than a week away from a Senate vote that was to decide whether he was going to be the first black person to serve as a military chief of staff in the United States history. He kind of put it out there, and it worked out. That video went viral. It was praised in a lot of quarters, but he didn't know that at the time. He was kind of taking a risk by putting himself out there in that way. It might have created more controversy, and it might have scuttled his chances of becoming the next Air Force Chief of Staff and the first African-American Chief of Staff in the United States history. But he told NPR later that year that even if that's what happened, he was ready to deal with those consequences, because he said he tries to live his life in a way where he does the right thing, even if it's hard, even if it leads to things not working out the way he hoped.
So he didn't face hurdles in his last confirmation as Air Force Chief of Staff, but the dynamics of the Senate have changed now with this hold on all military nominations by Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville. How is that, are you seeing, impacting his nomination as the next chairman of the Joint Chiefs?
Yeah, Senator Tuberville's hold is probably the biggest question mark on General Brown's confirmation as chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He's very widely respected by members of both parties. His strategic thinking and professionalism are widely respected. However, Senator Tuberville, his hold does apply to General Brown. It's part of a bigger issue over abortion and the military paying the travel expenses for some troops to receive abortion services if they cannot in their state. So that could be a speed bump for General Brown's confirmation as chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He might face some questions about the George Floyd video, but I think the Tuberville hold is probably the biggest X factor right now. So we're going to have to wait and see how that gets resolved.
Well, it remains to be seen. But Stephen Losey, thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
That's it for us this morning. To get more top stories and breaking news, go to defensenews.com/EBB to subscribe to the Early Bird Brief newsletter. If you liked what you heard, give us a like wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to follow us on social media @defense_news and @militarytimes. Also, please rate us and be sure to leave a comment. Today's Early Bird Brief is hosted and produced by me, Zimone Z. Perez. Today's episode features a story by Stephen Losey that you can read at defense news or militarytimes.com. Have a great day.